Well, I'll start sort of with a soft entrance here. I've got when we really get started in earnest, I'm going to share the screen with a presentation that I put together so you guys will have a visual slideshow to look at as we really get into the meat of the presentation. I wanted to take just a quick moment. It was requested that I take just a moment to talk a little bit about the smoke in the air right now.
Oh,
And obviously that's a real challenge to all of our bodies who are breathing it. As I'm sure maybe you already are aware, Kaylin, we're kind of on fire in Oregon right now. Not just Oregon, but the whole West Coast, really. The smoke is really bad in Bend. It has been for quite a few days. And I mean, first and foremost, my heart really goes out to all the people who have lost their homes and lost the lives of loved ones, for which we really don't even know where that stands. We're so in the middle of things right now. So first and foremost, my heart really goes out to everybody whose circumstances are much more dire than mine are, and that a lot of ours are, with really just having to deal with smoke here in Bend. But having said that, it still is really a stress on our systems. And I wanted to let you know that one of our doctors, Rob Nielsen, put together a great article. It's on our website, on our blog news feed, that goes into a lot of depth about things that you can do. I'd encourage you to take a look at that if it's of interest to you. He goes into foods that you can be eating, including foods that are rich in bioflavonoids that have anthocyanins in it. And those are foods like your cherries and your blueberries, red cabbage, are all rich in bioflavonoids. Not to mention, obviously, you can buy supplements as well that are rich in bioflavonoids, and we have those here at Hawthorne. Those are great for lung health in general, and really the health of every cell in the body, but particularly the anthocyanins are great for the lungs. In addition to that, there are quite a few herbs that are very protective for the lungs, and we've got some pre-made formulas here at Hawthorne. One's called Bronchotone. It's by a company called Ayush, and that's got some very great protective herbs in it for the lungs. Again, that's kind of a prefab formula that you can just take capsules of, and it's a really great way to protect the lungs from an herbal perspective. We've also got some loose tea herbs. We've created some loose tea blends with herbs that you can just make a tea out of, and get a little bag of these herbs and make a tea to sip on. These have the demulcent herbs in them, like mullein, slippery elm is another really good one, marshmallow root, nothing to do with the campfire variety of marshmallow, licorice root. These are all great demulcent herbs, otherwise known in the herbal community as the slimy herbs. They're very mucilaginous herbs, and because of that, they're very protective to mucous membranes, not just the throat and the digestive system, but also to the lung tissue as well. So if you're dealing with a lot of this smoke the way we are, these types of herbs will be helpful. Not to mention trying to stay out of the smoke, obviously, and not exercising outdoors right now. Unfortunately, it's amazing to realize in moments like this how much I do sort of require time outdoors for my mental health, and it's not much of an option at the moment. So anyways, just a bit on the lungs and lung health for you. And again, if you go to the website, you'll find Dr. Rob Nielsen's article where he goes into a lot more depth about lung health. So let's go ahead and get started in earnest with the presentation here. And what we'll do is, so far we've got a small group here, but I think I'll just kind of charge through the presentation, and you guys maybe jot down questions that you have, and we can get to your questions towards the end of the presentation, and you might have lots of them. But I'm going to attempt to share my presentation here, and see how that goes. There we go. There we go. All right, can you guys see that? Okay, great. All right, super. Well, really glad you guys were able to jump in on this, and I've got a lot of stuff to cover here. And as I was going through this again today, I realized that, you know, there are multiple presentations that could segue off of this presentation. There's a lot of information that we're covering, and I think we're getting into enough depth on each of these topics that you guys will walk away feeling like you've got some great information to work with here. First and foremost, you know, as always, my disclaimer here is that this is not a substitute for medical advice, and these are a lot of great ideas and tips. Oh, sorry, just a sec here. But I want to make sure that, as always, you'll want to be talking to a physician if you're making plans to change treatment plans, start a new treatment, or discontinue anything that you're already doing. Okay, so what I'm going to cover for you in this presentation is essentially these points of a bit of a philosophy for those of you that this will be new for, around our greater relationship with the microbial kingdom. I'm also going to cover the significance of pre-existing chronic health conditions when it comes to why we get sick in relationship to microbes like bacteria and viruses. I want to cover the importance of gut and digestive health in this whole story, specific dietary pitfalls for a healthy immune system, simple steps to improve your overall health and vitality, and then ultimately vitamins and herbs and nutrients that you can use to help support your overall level of health and vitality. And as I describe here in kind of this course description, avoiding microbes is an uncertain strategy. I thought that was a nice way of putting it, particularly in the environment that we're in around the world right now. And as we go on in this presentation, you'll understand more about what I mean by that. And we really do live in a sea of microbes. And there is a kind of an older theory that I'm about to describe to you, which is strictly what's referred to as the germ theory, which isn't entirely wrong, but it misses some really important points in terms of human health and well-being. First is a theory that's described as the terrain theory, or the theory of how the health of the biological terrain might be more important in determining why we get sick in relationship to microbes like bacteria and particularly viruses. This talk, of course, being more focused on viruses with the focus on flus and colds. And again, we're right around the corner from flu and cold season right now. At least here in the Northern Hemisphere, it typically gets going in October, and we can expect it through the spring typically. And obviously there's variation there. So this is ultimately a great time to be thinking about that, and to be thinking about, well, what's going on in my health and vitality right now, or in areas where I'm not so well and I have chronic health conditions going on, because addressing those things are really big determinants of how we do in the face of the vast amount of microbes that we live within. So again, this slide, bacteria, fungi, and viruses, oh my, right? Historically, we've believed that exposure to a bacteria or a virus means getting sick. I mean, and not just historically, that's exactly what we're in the middle of right now. It's been 24/7 on the news media. Stop the exposure, and at all costs, stay away from people, cover your face, and avoid exposure. That's been for about 150 years, that's been the predominant thinking with mainstream science. And so the way to be healthy is to avoid microbes, right? To avoid germs, to avoid bacteria and viruses. viruses. And I pose this question: why do some people get, really sick from the flu? These folks who seem to get hammered every year, they go down for weeks on end, while others, it's very mild. Other folks that you know these folks as well, maybe you're one of them, where you never get sick, you never get a flu, you never get a cold. So why is this the case? Is it because some people just are lucky and they don't get exposed, or is there more going on? So we'll talk about that. So the germ theory, and this is a 19th century, mid-19th century theory, largely championed, or at least originated by Louis Pasteur, a Frenchman, and this I pulled off of Wikipedia. In modern science, germ theory is developed by Louis Pasteur, has been the scientific consensus. Germ theory states that microorganisms, bacteria, virus, and fungi are the cause of most disease, at least infectious disease. It's the cornerstone of modern medicine and treatment of disease. Again, this is Wikipedia, so it's a quick summary there. So a contemporary of Pasteur's was a fellow by the name of Antoine Béchamp, and he was at odds with this theory, and he had some colleagues as well who also didn't think that Pasteur had it quite right. And essentially, his theory was one that you could argue was opposite. And he stated that it was more, you got sick in relationship to microbes only when there was an opportunistic capacity for that. He believed that microbes were everywhere. They existed inside of us, outside of us in a symbiotic way. And Béchamp noticed in his research that it was only when the tissue of the host became damaged or compromised in some way that the germs began to manifest or become associated with symptoms and ultimately disease. So to prevent illness, Béchamp advocated not the killing of germs, but the cultivation of health through diet, personal hygiene and hygiene of the environment, healthy lifestyle practices such as fresh air and exercise, and the idea that if the person had a strong immune system, had a high level of vitality, and that the quality of their biological terrain, that internal terrain of their bodies was healthy, that this person would not become sick. Or if they did become sick, it would be in a very mild way. So this is, again, largely in opposition to this more classic or popular theory that Pasteur brought to the table, that exposure to the germ equals illness. And again, that is Pasteur's theory has largely been the guiding thinking in medicine up until this very day. And we'll go in a little bit deeper to this, and you guys can decide for yourselves what makes sense. As the story goes, and I don't know how true this is, and I don't speak French, so I won't try to read the top line, but it's translated as the microbe is nothing, the terrain is everything. And this is purported to be the last words of Louis Pasteur. He finally conceded to his contemporaries after continued research that they ultimately had it right. Now, why that did not become, at that time, again, we're talking about mid to late 1800s, how things moved in the direction that they did, I think had a lot to do with the development in the early 1900s of antimicrobials and the capacity that we began to develop as a medical industry to kill germs. I'm going to move on here and just give you guys a slide here that really describes that, as I've already said, we live in a sea of microbes, more than you can imagine, and a lot more than people realize. And really the research of the last decade and some of the more recent research around viruses, really in just the last 3 to 5 years, has amplified how amazing the reality is about the sea of microbes that we are ultimately living in. And ultimately, that we are a product in many ways of that relationship. We've co-evolved with bacteria, viruses, and fungi over the millennia. And they're largely to thank for our resilience and our adaptability to on this planet. They have inspired genetic changes in our bodies, and they've inspired adaptation in ways that we're now, again, in just quite recent research, we're beginning to understand in greater depth. One of those is something that maybe you guys have heard. You hear about this quite a bit, that just the lower bowel, the colon of our bodies, it contains 10 times as many bacteria as we have human cells in our entire bodies. That's pretty staggering. Just that microbial flora in the gut, 10 times as many as human cells that we're walking around with. Pretty fascinating. And even in more recent research that's demonstrating that this isn't just in the lower gut. We're learning that it's also in around the kidneys and the liver and other organ systems, that we are essentially a colony of microbes. And many of which have the potential to cause disease if the system was out of balance in certain ways. This is also true with fungi. This is also true of protozoa. And again, protozoa is when we think about bad water, giardia infections, other things when you travel in countries that have poor water supplies, et cetera. And so we're very quick to associate a protozoa with an infection, a gut infection. Sometimes that's the case, but again, most of the time it's not. And what we have are many more commensal and symbiotic relationships where these organisms are as much as responsible for our health and wellness as they are illness. And I give credit here I'm going to give more credit on the next slide to Dr. Zach Bush. And I have a plug here for a webinar that I just watched of his. This is an MD who's really bringing some amazing science to the table right now, and I'd encourage you to check him out. This slide in particular is right off of a presentation of his, so full credit due to him and his research. But just to give you another idea of what we're talking about, specifically in relationship to viruses, 1 liter of seawater contains 10 to the 10th power of viruses. So that's 10 with 10 zeros after it. And that's 1 liter of seawater. And that's not sick seawater, that's healthy, normal seawater. In 1 gram of soil, 10 to the 10 viruses. In the healthy adult human body, 10 to the 10th power of viruses. And these are healthy people. We're not talking about people that are overrun with infection. We're talking about healthy adults. So, I mean, just take that in for a minute. It's pretty staggering when you think about it, particularly given that, again, as a medical paradigm, we're still operating on this pretense that we need to stay away from viruses at all costs. It's really fascinating that this can be happening, and that at the same time, we know there is some aspect of illness that's associated with certain bacteria and viruses. Again, another stat here, that a newborn baby at just 1 week of age, 10 to the 8th power of viruses in 1 gram of feces. Right? So a week-old human being has already taken on that milieu of microbes. And this isn't a sick, this is a very healthy 1 week-old baby, right? There's more viruses in the circulating air around the planet than there are stars in the known universe. I didn't put it down, but I believe it's 10 to the 30th or 31st power. So 31 zeros after the 10 of virus, of genetic material that's floating around in our air, in our circulation, right? And it's really stunning when you think about this. And it's important to separate viruses from these other microbes that were on the previous slide in terms of the whole milieu of microscopic things that we're living with. Viruses, first of all, are much, much smaller, and they're unique in that they're not alive. So in a way, when we talk about antiviral therapy, it's a little interesting. It's almost a bit of a misnomer because they're not alive. These cannot produce energy. They don't have any metabolic function. They can't replicate on their own. They can only do that once they've entered into a living cell, and so they're a very different and odd thing in that regard. Get this stat. 50% of the 20,000 genes you inherited from mom and dad were inserted into the mammalian genome by viruses over the eons. Half of the genes in our genome, in the mammalian genome. I mean, that's really staggering if you think about it, that over the eons, and we're talking a billion years when I say that, there has been this genetic shift that has happened. And again, I'm getting deeply into Zach Bush MD territory here. And again, all credit due to this particular webinar where he brings so much new research to the table about this topic. But the implication is that and he goes into this so elegantly, you guys would love it. Okay, I'm a bit of a Zach Bush fan right now, I'll admit it. But he goes into such amazing detail about the idea that when environments are pressured and stressed, that what they do is they mutate. It mutates genetically. And one of the messenger systems for the planet is through viruses. And that's why these viruses are circulating and are moving around the planet and moving between species. This idea that he brings forth is that this is a response of a stressed biological ecosystem on the planet that is creating these mutations and messaging it around the planet by way of viruses. So it's this really amazing theory that just flies in the face of so much of our traditional thinking in medicine. I'm really going on a tangent here, but I'd encourage you to check this material out that Dr. Bush is bringing forward if it intrigues you. I find it really fascinating. And he's also careful to say that doesn't mean that we're not getting sick in relationship to COVID, for example, or flu infections or rhinoviruses and other viruses that we see seasonally and regularly in our population. We are getting sick in relationship to them, but they're not the sole causal agents. If they were, then we would all be sick equally whenever we got exposed to these different things, right? So we're in a dance with the microbial kingdom, to say the least. And as I've already said, we exist, we've adapted, we thrive on this planet, not despite these microbes or in an antagonistic relationship with them, but really because of them. Right? The evidence of the terrain theory has really been supported, and we're seeing it in this, in these last 6 months more loudly than ever, right? Nearly half of the people that infected are asymptomatic, and don't quote me on this, these are rough figures here. Nearly the other half have a mild self-limiting illness to a COVID infection. A small percent become seriously ill. And again, these numbers, this is a CDC stat as of sometime in the last month or so, that 0.26% die. And then the more recent thing that everybody got up in arms about is that only 6% of those who died actually had a COVID only on their death certificate. The other 94% had at least 2 comorbidities associated with their death with COVID. So a lot of people started yammering on that, oh, well, it's only 6,000 people that have died from COVID in the US then. Well, we've been had by the CDC and on and on. And I don't think that that's fair. I mean, obviously, a lot of these people, COVID was very much involved with their death. And it's very important, though, to recognize that there was at least 2 comorbidities associated with the death of the vast majority of those folks. The point that I'm trying to make is that it's the same virus we're talking about here. And there's a huge variation associated in the response that people have. Again, a large percentage don't get sick. A large percentage get a mild self-limiting illness, very much like a cold or a flu. And again, I realize they're different different infections, and in many cases, extremely serious. So I don't mean to minimize that. The point I'm getting at is that it's a really similar case with the influenza virus, with the flu, and with colds as well. And and again, you maybe know this personally, and you certainly know it from friends and family, that for some folks, when they get hit by a cold, it's a big ordeal, and they get very, very sick, and it affects other areas in their body. Maybe this is true for you, and for many people, it's more of a mild and self-limiting situation. So thinking back to those previous slides, if we are in this milieu of microbes that's so vast and extensive, and we have so many viruses and bacteria and protozoa that are part of our internal ecosystem, part of the soil around us, it's clear that they aren't the cause of our illness, right? The cause of our illnesses associated with these things is when there's something going on with the biological terrain that puts us in a position where we're not in equilibrium with those microbes, where we're not able to have a healthy immune response that protects us adequately and creates either an immunity, as we call it, from an immune system antibody relationship, or another level of commensal relationship to that infection. So the coexisting conditions that have gotten a lot of attention from COVID, but are also just as relevant when it comes to flu infections, are hypertension, diabetes, obesity, heart disease. Essentially, when there is inflammation of the body's tissues, there's a dysbiosis, meaning an imbalance of all of these microbes that we've just described. And an immune system that's not responding in a balanced way, that puts us in a position where we are much more likely in the big schema of things to be one of those lower statistics that you don't want to be in, that 6% or that 0.25%. And it's not, of course, to say that there's not outliers. There are certainly young people that appear otherwise healthy that get very ill from the flu, and maybe even to the level of it being deadly. Just like with COVID, of course, there are outliers off the edges of the bell curve. That will always be the case. They'll always be championed on the news over and over again to scare the crap out of us. But in terms of the middle of the bell curve, and really the vast majority of cases, these are the conditions, and there of course are many others, that will put the body in a position where it is less likely to be able to respond in a healthy way when there's an exposure to a novel microbe that the body is not used to, or in the instance of the flu, which comes around very typically seasonally, but as you know, it mutates wildly, and which is why we can't keep up with it with the flu vaccine. And arguably, the statistics on the flu vaccine are the honest truth of it is that it can, in certain age groups and in certain instances, it can lessen the number of days of illness, lessen the severity of the flu illness. But that's only if it's the right flu strain that made it into the vaccine, which is largely a crapshoot in the world of vaccine making. And it has not been shown to decrease the incidence of death with the vaccine that is offered for the flu. So there doesn't appear to be, from a mortality perspective, there doesn't appear to be any benefit as far as the research is concerned. So chronic disease, again, something that is really worth addressing. If you are in a position where you're dealing with any of the previously mentioned diseases that are very common in the United States and around, civilized or first world countries around the world. So on this slide, I list, very broadly, treating chronic disease. and I'm just a little bit biased, but these are the list of things that I think are worth considering when it comes to treating chronic disease. I think that conventional, current, modern medicine, as it's referred to, is very helpful when someone's in a crisis, has gotten into a car wreck, needs an emergency room. That's where that medicine really shines. And of course, there are more sophisticated. I don't mean to, whittle it down to just that. But when it comes to chronic disease, you really aren't going to get anything more than symptom management and disease management unless you get to a physician who's thinking through in a more holistic way, who's really wanting to look at deeper underlying causes and help get to the root of those illnesses and create a lifestyle plan as well as a medicinal treatment plan to deal with things. I happen to think naturopaths and other holistic functional medicine style physicians are very good at that. Acupuncture and Chinese medicine, from a very different approach, offers a similar capacity to stimulate a healing process in the body. Essentially, as I said here in this last point, the body knows how to heal itself, and it's always trying to accomplish that. And, a holistic thinking physician will help a person determine what's getting in the way of that. And as I say here, what conditions internally, externally, what conditions physiologically with the gut, the endocrine system, what conditions emotionally, mentally might be in place in this person's life or in this person's being that's preventing that body, that innate intelligence from being able to heal itself the way that it is programmed and hardwired to do. So as I say, treat the cause, treat the person, not the disease. Or in the case of a lot of what we're talking about here, and not the microbe, right? Because going after the microbe, I believe, leaves us with limited results, with limited outcomes at best. And like I've already said, I'm repeating myself, but I think that's well evidenced by the situation that we're in right now, that if it were just the microbe, then every single person that ran into the flu or the coronavirus or anything else would get sick and get sick in a strong way. And we could then maybe argue that the disease is solely caused by the microbe. And I don't believe that that's the case. So to go over some of the things that are, ultimately foundational from the perspective of what we can do to create a biological terrain that is more consistent with health and will put you in a position where you're more likely to have an optimal response in the face of a novel exposure. Starts largely with the gut and the digestive system. So the old adage of you are what you eat is in many ways very, very true. And this is broken down a bit into the upper digestive system. And again, this is almost a talk in and of itself, so I'm not going to get into excruciating detail here. But the upper digestive system is ultimately where we've got hydrochloric acid in our stomach. This is in and of itself a microbial barrier. This is a barrier for the entryway of novel microbes that the body is not does not have a meaningful relationship with already. And so having a healthy stomach is an important part of the immune system, believe it or not. If you have a low level of stomach acid in your stomach, which happens naturally as we grow older, but can also happen when you're younger, particularly if your doctor has prescribed a proton pump inhibitor or some other type of acid blocking drug. That's going to drastically lower your stomach acid. Those drugs work very good to do that, which might improve your heartburn temporarily, but it's going to drastically impact how well your body starts its digestive process at the top, and it does impact your immune system in that way of being a barrier as well. The lower GI tract, the large intestine, is where we talk a lot about in relationship to probiotics. And is that microbial flora healthy, or is it dysbiotic? Is it out of balance with a microbial flora that is one that will sustain health? And one aspect that can affect that greatly are antibiotics. If folks have been on multiple rounds of antibiotics, that generally puts them in a weakened state in terms of a healthy microbial flora. And that's a place that naturopathic physicians and other holistic providers love to just jump in on right away and help to restore a healthy gut flora. Because it's such an important part of, one, this next point around gut absorption, and is the small and large intestine inflamed? Is it absorbing nutrients well? Is there a leakiness there that's contributing to malabsorption and other inflammatory issues? This gut microbiome, as it's referred to, this vast microflora in the gut, it's responsible for so many things. There's piles of research on this, and not only is it important for digestion of food properly, but also the creation of certain vitamins and nutrients for the body, for detoxification, for the gut-brain connection. There's just amazing research about mental health and its relationship to what's going on in your gut. It's really fascinating stuff. And the neurotransmitters of the brain are all in the gut as well. It's very fascinating stuff. This lymph tissue that the doctor always feels when you have a sore throat to see if it's swollen, this lymphatic tissue here, over 70% of that tissue is in your gut. So you could argue that nearly 3/4, if not more, of the immune system's actual anatomical tissue is in the gut. It's referred to as the GALT, the gut-associated lymphatic tissue. And this tissue is responsible for the lifelong interface between the digestive tract, between the lower gut, and your immune system. The immune system is largely educated in this area of the body. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it, over time, over millions of years, what have mammals done? We wander around and pick stuff up off the forest floor and stick it in our mouth and see what happens. And so I think it's by a very intelligent design that we need this vast amount of immune system tissue in our guts. So all of this to say that folks that have an unhealthy, inflamed digestive system are at a higher risk for not having a healthy response to microbes that have the potential to be associated with illness. So again, as a naturopathic physician, this is an area that we always jump on and go to great lengths to try to help improve health here, because it will mean that you will have a better chance, again, of being one of those folks that's going to have a mild flu, if at all, or a mild cold, or other respiratory viruses, etc. So general dietary pitfalls for a vital immune system. You've probably heard a lot of this before, pretty basic stuff, but sugar in general and refined sugars are something that it's never going to help you fight off that cold better. It's just not going to. It contributes to inflammation for most people, and there's some really interesting research that shows that white blood cells act a little drunk, and it's certainly less effective if somebody is consuming a lot of refined sugar on a regular basis. Dairy products in general, I'm generalizing, that they tend to be very mucilaginous and can help with the promotion of phlegm and really complicate particularly upper respiratory infections when people come down with a cold or a flu. If you're eating a lot of cheese and or milk products, it doesn't tend to help things at all. Excuse me. So really any food that contributes to inflammation or irritation in your digestive system is going to put you again in a position where you have less vitality and a less optimal response. So again, I'm mentioning just a couple, sugar and dairy. There are certainly a whole list of foods that fall into the realm of potentially inflammatory. This kind of, again, gets into a whole other area, but people that are eating too much red meat, that tends to be anti-inflammatory. I didn't include that on the slide. For many people, wheat products and gluten in general contributes to inflammation. A lot of times when we get into this area of discerning for folks, we'll either recommend elimination diets if someone's suspicious that something they're eating is inflaming the gut, or there's some really cool testing that can be done, some simple blood tests that we routinely do in our office that can be sent out to a lab to ultimately identify specifically, are there some unique foods that are creating inflammation in your gut and thereby compromising your overall vitality and your immune system? So on the other hand, there's a lot to be done to focus on foods that are going to promote health and vitality, and particularly in relationship to the immune system. Garlic is a very immune supportive food on many levels. I included shiitake mushrooms on this list, and that should say others in terms of mushrooms. Root veggies, particularly in the fall and winter, are just so great to include in stews and soups. Bone broth is a very strongly nutritive food that can also be included in the stews and soups that are going to be very supportive for a healthy digestive system, a non-inflamed digestive system, as well as a healthy immune response. And, generally speaking, obviously avoiding processed foods, trying to get locally sourced foods and organic foods is really worth the effort. Avoiding Roundup contaminated foods. The glyphosate is such a terrible substance that again, I recently shared something that originated from Zach Bush, where he listed a whole bunch of countries that have banned glyphosates already, a bunch of countries that are considering banning glyphosate currently, a couple countries that have partial bans of glyphosates, and guess where the US falls? Nowhere on any of those lists, sadly. But glyphosate is doing a lot of harm to mammals in general, to other life on this planet, certainly doing a lot of harm to humans. And it's just a real travesty that this particular product has made its way so deeply into our agricultural industry. As I've already said, minimizing refined sugars, drinking plenty of water throughout the day. These are some pretty basic grandmotherly advice here, while avoiding too much caffeine and alcohol is always going to support the body's overall vitality and therefore ultimately your immune response as well. So I want to talk about some specific nutrients here. So sort of getting away from addressing the chronic health conditions and each one of those chronic health conditions is obviously a talk in and of itself on the ways to go about that. The gut health, as I've already described, is something that's global and is going to not only improve vitality from head to toe in every way, but it's also going to improve your immune response to novel microbes and also help to strengthen that commensal relationship that you have. And now these are some specific nutrients that I've listed now, and I've included some study links that we're getting really specific here to viruses in particular. This is relevant for bacterial infections as well, but I'm focusing largely on the flu with this, and you'll find that there's a lot of great research you guys might have heard in regard to COVID specifically, there was some solid research about vitamin D as well, that many of the cases of mortality, the folks were vitamin D deficient. So there is the thinking that it's well worth having an adequate level of vitamin D for viral infections in general. These links on this slide are particularly related to influenza for the most part. So this is a time of the year in the Northern Hemisphere when we're coming into that end of summer season where we'll expect that vitamin D levels will normally start to drop. And that's because we don't get the sun exposure. And if you're someone who doesn't spend a lot of time outside anyway, then that's, you're potentially a year-round candidate for vitamin D. Vitamin D has a lot to do with where you live on the planet. And if you lived it on the equator, arguably, you would not have to worry about vitamin D deficiency. But, we're near the 45th parallel up here in Central Oregon. And the further away you are from the equator, the lower the levels of endogenous internal conversion of vitamin D you're going to experience. So up here in Central Oregon, we test it in blood work all the time, and it's always low in people who are not supplementing it. Some of the lowest I've seen are people that have moved down from Alaska. You can imagine that region, you're going to expect very low vitamin D levels. And why is this important? Because it's, and I'm focusing just on the immune system here, but vitamin D, again, we could do a whole lecture just on vitamin D. We've always known that it's just so good for bone. It's so important for basic bone density and bone health, but it's also really crucial for neurological health and health of the nervous system. It's important for heart health. The vitamin D research reads like a panacea, like it will treat everything that could go wrong in your body. Cancer incidences are lower in people, virtually every type of cancer are lower in people that have adequate levels of vitamin D. So there's only like about 1,000 reasons to make sure your vitamin D levels are high enough to be therapeutically meaningful. And the immune system happens to be one of those, that it's very, very important. And creating, and again, I'm starting to kind of modify my thinking and languaging a little bit. It's not so much about being antibacterial or antiviral necessarily, because of everything that we discussed about in the first few slides here, right? It's more about being a healthy immune modulator, right? So that we have an immune system that's responding appropriately and not overreacting, but also not underreacting, to help us maintain that balance that we have with the microbial kingdom. So vitamin D, many people choose to get it tested so you can see on lab work where you're at. It's a very cool thing to do, and it's not expensive. But a lot of the research, lands us in the range of 55 to 80 on lab work for what's called 25 hydroxy vitamin D, that being largely the best therapeutic zone to be in. And again, you're only going to get there living at northern, or if you're in the southern hemisphere, further southern latitudes, you're only going to get there with a supplement, in my opinion. So up here, we routinely recommend 5,000 IUs a day for adults. That's a very safe dose to take. For some people, it'll take 10,000 IUs a day to get them up into that higher, that therapeutic range. So again, there's value in doing a blood test to see where you're at with this. So again, vitamin D, I'm a big fan, and it makes a meaningful impact on the health of your body overall, as well as the immune system. Vitamin C, also very protective when it comes to being susceptible to viral infection. And this is a study link down here. Early large dose of IV vitamin C is the treatment of choice for the COVID infection. That was a study that came out of China. So that is a link really related to COVID. The second study there is more particularly about influenza and the flu, but vitamin C is supportive, both from a preventative perspective, and I have a dose up here of 1 to 4 grams daily. A lot of people, if they haven't been taking vitamin C, if you pull out the bottle of vitamin C and you take 4 grams, you might end up on the toilet in a short amount of time. You're not going to hurt yourself with vitamin C. It's a water-soluble vitamin. Other folks could take 4 grams and be fine. I recommend starting with 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C. Many people can work their way up and create what's called a bowel tolerance with vitamin C. But again, you don't need to take a lot from a preventative measure. If you did start to come down with an illness that was very likely to be some viral infection, increasing the dose of vitamin C would be a great measure to take. Vitamin A is one that's also protective when it comes to viruses. It's funny, I don't know why, but I don't generally recommend it from a preventative perspective. I generally recommend it more from a treatment perspective. But there are certainly, plenty of formulations of immune herbs and vitamin and nutrients that include beta carotene, which is one form of vitamin A that's very supportive to the immune system. There's also the retinol form of vitamin A, which is a different form. And I like to use this form of vitamin A when I'm treating an active infection. There's a really wide range of dosing with vitamin A. You can see I have a range of 10,000 to 100,000 IUs. A woman would never want to take this much vitamin A in the retinol form if she was pregnant or trying to get pregnant. You can create. It's a very bad idea for the unborn fetus if a woman is taking anything up above 10,000 IUs of vitamin A. And there's varying thoughts on that and varying opinions, but you want to be careful with vitamin A if there's any pregnancy involved. But again, in terms of viral infections, vitamin A is absolutely an ally. Herbs, I've listed kind of a general schema of herbs here, not being very exacting with a specific formula for you, because there's room to get creative with herbs, which is why they're a lot of fun. But you can see the list I have here is elderberry, osha, golden seal, astragalus, lemon balm, lomatium, licorice root, hyssop, echinacea. These are all herbs that have, again, I use the word antiviral activity, but they're immune modulating in many ways and can help to prevent. And I like a lot of these, particularly in the early phases when something is just coming on. If you feel you got that kind of initial body ache coming on and you're not in the full-blown later stages of it, is particularly where I find relatively high, what I would call high doses of preparations of these herbs very, very useful. And again, there's so many different ways to take these. There's prefab encapsulated formulas. I really like making tinctures with 3 to 5 of these herbs, depending on the specific symptoms. And it can really help shorten the duration and severity of a viral illness. Herbs. Probiotics ties into what we were talking about earlier in relationship to the gut health. I guess I could have put that slide a few back, but it says tied into gut health and well-being. And in general, probiotics are one where it really does depend, the brand that you get and the formulation that you get really does matter. With vitamin D, for example, vitamin C to some extent, I'm less concerned about what product you buy, at the health food store. Probiotics are one where you do need to be a lot more discerning and make sure that you're getting a product that is a reputable manufacturer and has a strain that is viable. A simple way that you can shop, if you're shopping yourself, is to make sure you're getting one that's in the refrigerated section of your health food store, or that if you're buying it at your doctor's office, that he's keeping it in the refrigerator. That's one way. Not that all refrigerated brands are awesome, but I just listed a few here that I'm a fan of. We've carried for a lot of years the Pharmax HLC, formerly known as Soroil, brand of probiotics, a tried and true formulation of probiotics that are going to help populate the lower GI tract with beneficial flora. Similarly, with the Claire Labs brand, we have found those to be, each of these companies offer several different versions of their probiotics, but we found these to be good brands and are reputable. This product, Ion Biome, is a newer one to me. It's a Zach Bush from his company. I believe it's his company. And this is a really unique microbiome product. It's quite different than the more traditional probiotics. These are essentially ancient soils, if you will, or very old soils. So it's soil bacteria that is used to support a healthy gut microbiome. So, and just one study here about viral infection particularly, and a positive of, sort of proven research effects of probiotics and stimulating a healthy immune response. So I'm a big fan of probiotics and think they're very worthwhile in the overall support of a healthy immune system. Just a note on fever here. I suspect that you guys are aware of this concept, but really amazingly to me, it's still just commonplace in conventional medicine to reach for the ibuprofen or the more often the Tylenol, which it has pretty decent anti-fever activity. And it's not to say that taking a Tylenol is going to completely undo the course of your immune system responding to an illness, but it is going to slow it down. And the reason is that again, back to the intelligence of our very ancient and wise bodies, fever arises for a very intelligent reason. It's not a mistake. And it's amazing that, in kind of an emergency room mentality, it gets treated as a mistake of the body. Well, it's not. It's something that the brain, the hypothalamus, creates a fever for the body in response to an overwhelming exposure or other conditions in the body related to bacteria or viruses. 100 degrees to 103 degrees is considered to be a really efficient, effective fever. And if, when this kind of thing happens at our house and one of the kids gets a cold or gets something coming on in the fall or winter, and they mount a fever, our philosophy is way to go, body, nice going, because what it means is that, at a higher temperature, your body is much more efficient. You guys have all had a fever, the heart races, you get sweaty, you get hotter, the whole circulation is happening faster, all the activity of the white blood cells, the immune system are more effective and efficient. You're going to have a less severe and a shorter course of any given infection if you allow your body to mount its natural innate fever. And it's a very rare occasion that a fever becomes dangerous. There are some rare circumstances where a fever can become dangerous. If you start approaching 104, 105 degrees, I'd say you're getting to a situation where you ought to start taking some measures to decrease that fever. But it's really rare that the body's going to do that. Vast majority of times you're going to have a fever in that 100 to 103 degree range, and you're going to get through any infection quicker if you let it ride. Mental and emotional well-being, I'm giving you guys the full package here of all of the things to consider when it comes to supporting a healthy immune response, really feeling prepared for flu and cold season. We have to talk, at least for a moment, about mental and emotional well-being as well. It's not all about things that we're putting into our body from a dietary perspective or a nutrient perspective. Mentally and emotionally speaking, stress, as you've all heard, I'm sure, is a potent inhibitor of the immune system. And it's important to recognize that chronic stress will lower your immune response overall and will put you in a situation where you're less likely to be able to deal with an infection as effectively. So the take home here is take it seriously, and if there's a lot of stress going on, it's worth dealing with to put yourself in a better place for colds and flus. How to do that? Well, there's like only about 100 different ways, and I've just listed a few here: yoga, meditation, acupuncture, turning off the TV screens before bedtime, and this is actually here on this next slide around sleep and sleep hygiene, and things that you can do to make sure that you're sleeping well at night, because this is also very important for a healthy immune system. And I realize that we're at 6:30, so I'm kind of racing along here through these. Well, these are the last slides. Okay, so this is just a reminder about how important it is to get good sleep at night, and you will always have a more effective immune system in that way.